You're listening to the Physio Matters podcast in association with exerciseprescriber.com, and this is session 64. Welcome back to the Physio Matters podcast. I'm Jack Chew, and I will keep the intro short and sweet because we've got a cracking episode for you. Huge thanks, as usual, to our last month's guest and guest interviewer, we could say. Felicity Thauback on the microphone, doing a great job of interviewing Neil O'Connell. It was an absolute pleasure to listen to, and I hope you really enjoyed it. It seems you did. The feedback on social media has been fantastic, and a real nice way to hear that people are engaging with the literature and finding that useful as they wade through that swamp, because it is tricky. So thanks to Flick and to Neil for that. It was brilliant. We released the tickets for the conference, the Big R's conference, Reforming MSK Practice, October the 18th and 19th in Manchester. Do visit buytickets.at/reforming MSK and keep an eye on reform.physio/conference, where it will be updated with speaker announcements and programme and things like that. There might still be a few tickets knocking around. We did an early bird. We separated off various different factions of our project so that we could try and make more tickets available for early bird. So if you use the discount code FIRST50, all one word, then hopefully that still works. It'll get you 20% off all tickets. There will be virtual tickets as well for anyone that wants to attend, but they will be probably limited. And so if you want to attend virtually, all the live streams will be fed straight out, and therefore do get onto that fairly swiftly if you want that. Now, one of the things worth mentioning, for those that want to support Physio Matters and its projects, we are bursting at the seams with new bits and pieces. Physio Natters has relaunched. Patient Matters and Health Matters are launched via the Kickstarter campaign. We've had people that have wanted to send us subscriptions and donations to premium content and webinars and other things that we have available. And so we've decided to leave Patreon fairly soon. So we'll be winding that down and incentivizing people to transfer over to our own subscription service, which you can find at www.choosehealth.co.uk/support, and that'll give you details. And we're going to process all payments through Stripe for subscriptions on a monthly basis, and you can also do one-off payments if you want to support the work that we do. And so you'll find out all details there. Many thanks to Jack March and Mark Reed for putting that together. So on to this month's episode. Really enjoyed this, and there's a bonus content that we'll push forward, and you'll find that on the live stream version of this, or the video version of this, at the Facebook page, and of course across Twitter, where me and Rory do a back and forth sort of role play conversation, but we've got that as a bit of bonus content for you. But we took that out of the interview, and it was about motivational interviewing. Maddy Lewis and Rory Allott are a physiotherapist and a psychologist who are especially interested in motivational interviewing and the application of it. And we got into some real detail about the pros and cons and what it is, what it isn't. And without further ado, I just want to bring you the interview because it was belting. And I'll see you at the other side for more reflections on what was a really interesting conversation. So I hope you enjoy it. Delighted to be here today with Maddy Nicholson and Rory Allott to discuss motivational interviewing, something that we scratched the surface of a little bit with Dr. Richard Bennett way back when, I think it's 2014, back when we started Physio Matters. And so we sort of touched on various different psychological interventions and how they might map onto MSK practice. However, astutely, we've had some notice that there's an awful lot that comes up on Physio Matters about exercise adherence and compliance and things like that. And so motivational interviewing, definitely something well worth revisiting. And so Maddy had spotted that, reached out to us, and also explained that she worked with Rory on these things, and so felt like we could bring a bit more detail to it. And so Jack March has been in correspondence discussing how we can try and bring that forward. And so we've put some questions together, and we're hoping to have a really interesting discussion today about how that might map onto MSK practice, some of the shortfalls and shortcomings of it if it's tracked rigidly, but also trying to see how we can embed it within practice and make it relevant to you guys in clinic. And so first thing I want to do is allow them to introduce themselves. So Maddy, if you could go first, tell us about yourself and also your career journey to date, if you don't mind.
Yeah, hi, my name is Maddy Nicholson. My background is musculoskeletal outpatients. Did that for about 6 years, learned things like acupuncture, manual therapy. Then I did a master's in musculoskeletal medicine. And my dissertation was about physio's management of back pain, and something that came out of that was that MI may be of benefit. And then for the past 6.5 years, I've worked as a clinical specialist physio in persistent pain management. I work in an MDT clinic using a biopsychosocial approach. I do pain management programs, psychology physio clinics. I have some ACT training. I'm a prescriber, and some MI training from Rory.
Brilliant. No, that's great. So same question to contestant number 2. Rory, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, I'm Rory Allott. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I suppose I've been a clinical psychologist since about 2002, but even before that I was introduced to motivational interviewing in the largest qualitative study of heavy drinkers in the UK, and in that study we were using motivational interviewing to actually have a conversation with people about their drinking. So that was very early, that was in 1992. So it's been in my life for a long time. Since 2002 I've mostly worked in the NHS in mental health, and I'm a clinical lead in a mental health service in this region, actually, in Trafford.
Oh, right. Yeah. Brilliant. Oh, great. And so, I mean, I'm interested to some extent in the history of it as well, especially 92. I mean, you could have told me that MI was, say, created or coined in 95, and I wouldn't have known exactly when it was. So if you can tell us a little bit about what is motivational interviewing, its story so far, if you would as well, and how could it map on to physiotherapy? So I ask you both that, but Rory, if you could lead on that.
I mean, I think it's worth, going back in history to see where it emerged, because that sort of tells a story about what it is, really. And Bill Miller, who originated motivational interviewing, and then alongside Steve Rolnick, he was on sabbatical in Norway. He was, in the 80s working in alcohol misuse, and he's from America. And at that time, the main treatment approach was to sort of break down denial, some behaviorism, entering into therapy and into psychologists' work, trying to reinforce abstinent behaviour and stuff like this. But Bill was a bit different to everyone that was around, and on his sabbatical in Norway, he was talking to people who were heavy drinkers, and the psychologists around him suddenly saw things changing in people who had entrenched problems. And they sort of asked Bill, what are you doing? What are you doing that's different? And Bill then made it his lifelong career to describe that, really. Right. Yeah. So and that's really important, because I guess it didn't start with a theory that then was built on and some clever techniques created out of it. Actually, it sort of emerged from practice, and it emerged from what works in practice. And I think motivational interviewing has always wanted to hold on to that as a fact, that actually it's looking at what works in practice to actually help people, motivate them to change health-damaging behaviours. So that was sort of in the early 80s that started, and then Steve got involved a bit later on. So what is motivational interviewing? Well, it's exactly that. It's having good conversations that maybe lead to the person you're talking to maybe feeling a little bit more motivated to actually move in a healthy direction rather than a health damaging direction. And that is it in its entirety, really. Obviously there's a lot more specifics that we can get into, but that's it in a nutshell.
Right. Yeah. And it does reach into various different health disciplines and can and should arguably underpin an awful lot of our conversational behaviour that we have with patients and with each other and with groups and all sorts of stuff. But I want to ask how it maps on, you feel, to physiotherapy specifically.
Yeah, I suppose if I explain why we got Rory to come to see us in the pain team, it might be helpful. We were finding we were just having really difficult conversations with our clients. It felt like resistance was coming up when we had suggestions of how they might want to manage their pain differently. We're getting people not attending and cancelling, those kind of things. So we brought Rory along. And also, when I used to work in musculoskeletal outpatients, it was a lot of, I've given them that advice now. Oh, why haven't they gone away and just done it? You know, so to me, having a conversational style that helps people change their behaviours is really needed in physio. I mean, that's what we're asking people to do, is do things differently to how they normally would, whether it's following exercises or whatever advice you want to give, looking at pacing, acceptance of pain being there in terms of persistent pain, not battling pain, all those difficult subjects that you're raising with people. Just telling them to do something different isn't really, well, I haven't found to be very helpful.
No, it's rarely sufficient. Now and again it can kind of work, can't it, which is nice. It catches you by surprise. But trying to instigate behaviour change is something that we're having to lean on. We're not babysitters, and so the act of doing needs to be the thing that is the mechanism of effect of a sort, is trying to inspire that change or trying to motivate them to do. And the what I wanted to just touch on was, Is there a danger if that is how it emerged from practice? And I prefer that does feel truly bottom up, like an emergent phenomena that then we then try to understand. Is there, though, a danger that you can then add the theory for the sake of underpinning a sort of je ne sais quoi of good conversation from a good conversationalist, that the theory that has emerged from it, being post hoc, could be almost designed to support it? Is that one of the concerns?
Oh yeah. Of course it is. And I mean, I spend a bit of time with Steve Rolnick, and he's totally unapologetic about that fact. Right. He doesn't feel like there needs to be some clever psychological theory, sort of overlaid on what we know works. It's one of the best researched behaviour change interventions in the world. It's clearly described, the method. And so we know when people are doing it, and we know that it's effective. Do we need a theory as well? Bill Miller would love a theory. He's the academic. Okay. Well, Steve's the academic as well, but Bill would prefer a theory. And there are lots of theories at the moment that try to explain the mechanism of change in motivational interviewing. I don't think any are sufficient at the moment. They're very interesting, but I guess I fall on that side, the practice side, that I know what works, and therefore I don't need a theory to demonstrate that. Some people would argue that having a theory might actually make it stronger, might make the method stronger. If you know what the mechanisms of action are, then you can strengthen them. So for instance, we've discovered that something called affirmation in motivational interviewing is coming to the fore now as one of the key skills that actually leads to people in front of you talking more about change. And that is a little bit surprising, because in the past we've been focused very much on listening skills, and affirmation is really about offering a noticing of quality in a person in front of you. So you're a great talker on the radio, and that's
it feels so good.
I'm blushing. Well, it's funny because you've just made me aware of something that I think I'm going to continue to wax in and out of, which is that to conduct this interview about motivational interviewing feels intimidating of a sorts, in which I'm then really going to be scrutinising my style, which I think is hopefully in a healthy way rather than in a paranoid way. But generally, that is the fine line that I want to touch on. If I can ask as to whether can one of the criticisms, and it's low-hanging fruit, I accept, but generally when it comes to people that come to see us in pain, that then if we were to lean on, say, affirmation, just as a one example, or just generally on theories, that there is this risk of condescension if that's all we played.
Oh, definitely.
And also, a bad affirmation is just an interruption.
Oh,
and so
yeah.
You're wrestling with that all the time.
Yeah.
So, what do you think that is? I mean, you seem to be agreeing with that in principle, but how do
definitely.
we therefore account for that?
I'm just thinking of an example the other day where it was the initial assessment with a persistent pain patient, and they were very low in mood, and you're right. You've got to almost feel the moment of when to give an affirmation and build enough rapport with that person and engage with them before you even go there. Otherwise, like you say, it won't feel genuine. And also, you've got to gauge: is this person the type of person that will comfortably receive an affirmation, if that makes sense? But truly placing a genuine one at the right moment, as Rory said, I've found to be really powerful, and I've actually noticed the greatest amount of change talk coming after giving someone an affirmation. And that's not being, oh, well done for doing that, that cheerleading. It's very much seeing that strength in that person, taking you as being alongside them. You're not being an expert anymore. You're just listening to them and finding exactly what their sort of strength is, if you like, within them.
When you've been practicing, do you feel that you've, or do you still continue to almost walk into this sort of sunny optimism that sometimes then does rub people up the wrong way? Or is that something you were able to move past?
This is something that I was thinking about, actually. MI isn't being just being positive, Sure. Definitely not. That wouldn't fit with the sense of who I am, or am I? It's deeper than that, I suppose. An example of an affirmation that I gave was, even though you're feeling really low in mood here, you've still come to this appointment today. So something like that I wouldn't say that comes across as being, oh, isn't everything great? It's just getting into really what's going on here for that person. And that's then genuine. Yeah, it's that genuine. Definitely not. I would say I'm not someone that's, oh, everything's great. That's. Sure. I mean, I don't know what you'd think about that, Rory.
Well, practice, wouldn't it? I suppose.
I've heard Bill say in the past that in some ways he would have rathered he hadn't called it motivational interviewing. Yeah. And I think to a certain extent that sort of motivational bit, people just assume means cheerleading and
sure.
Sort of going in and doing that motivational speaking. I think that's how it's
or even Mr. Motivator.
Yeah, exactly.
If you remember him from yesteryear and stuff, you do have those connotations.
I mean, I was talking to Rory about in the office, when David Brent comes in and does his motivational. That's the idea I had before I had the training. I thought, oh, this sounds really awkward and really, and it's just complete opposite to that.
Sure, it probably is. I've not really thought about how what the, I suppose because it's embedded within not just my practice but also my understanding of conversation now, is that I probably haven't associated that what those two words would typically mean. It's almost neither, really, isn't it? You wouldn't call it an interview because you're trying to make it conversational, and it's not motivational in that sense.
Well, I think some people when they're training, I've seen Bill do this, separate the word interview. Yeah, okay. And he does that to emphasise the fact that this is a conversation between two people looking at something together. So the chronic pain or the exercise, you're together looking at that problem, and I guess that's the sort of Maddy sort of alluded to a sort of spirit and embodiment of motivational interviewing, and I heard Steve recently describe two levels, sort of eagle perspective and a mouse perspective, and we're switching between the two at the moment. At the mouse perspective, we're sort of talking about affirmation, as one skill, But at the eagle perspective, Maddy's talking about the right timing and doing this in a congruent way with the client's mood and where they're at in their program of health and sort of moving on with their lives. So you can't separate the two; both have to be there.
Getting that balance is an important but tricky one, and I think we'll come to that, and we'll come to that balance. I think I will revisit almost the balance of theory and practice, and the evidence and what that tells us, and also then the practice-based evidence that emerges from especially N of 1 examples of complex cases that wouldn't map onto a typical trial format of any sort, and the pragmatics of that. I definitely want to revisit that. But for the moment, Rory, if I can just ask that, just to finish on that point almost, is that I fear, and I think that it's bad practice of a sort, but it's something that continues to be fallen into, is that we've used the word genuine, I think all three of us at this point. However, it can become quite contrived and almost that it's trying to come across as genuine. And I think I had a friend and colleague of mine that said it was almost the idea of natural look makeup. It's as makeup, but to look natural as a means of a facade. And that does concern me when people overthink it, overtrain, overdo, and therefore they do wear a mask, to overuse that metaphor a little bit. And so whilst I can't even force myself to be devil's advocate in that position, because I find that to be poor practice, and I think that is overthink. But it's also something that I've encountered so frequently that I just wonder if I could get your take on whether or not you feel that is a concern, and also how to account for it best.
I think it is a concern. It's something I hear in my supervisees all the time on tapes, So, right. I hear people going through the motions in order to demonstrate the skills to me on a tape, yeah? Sure. And then I'm listening to the client, yeah, to the patient or client or customer, and it's like they're wondering what on earth's going on with this practitioner in front of them, and what's often missing there is this embodiment of partnership, yeah, with this, that you're in this together, yeah, that you're connecting as a collaborative relationship, yeah. So if you're not truly listening to what the client's saying, then you're not collaborating, and that's one of the key spirits of motivational interviewing, yeah. Emphasizing autonomy is the other big eagle perspective, yeah? So if you're not really, truly, genuinely believing that the client's in control of their life, yeah, then you're probably not doing motivational interviewing. And then compassion, which is something that's been added into, the third text of motivational interviewing. So there's been 3 over the last sort of 20 years or whatever. And I think Bill and Steve added that for this very point, yeah, that we're there in a position as practitioners to be other-directed, to be focused on the other person, yeah, and to guide them to a place of health. If you're thinking about your best skill, your ability at doing motivational interviewing, your trick to try and get the person to change, then it's not motivational interviewing, it's something else, yeah? So I don't think that I would say it's a problem. I'd just be saying you're not doing MI, yeah? Right, yeah. Okay. Give some feedback.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it needs to be... And that embodiment is definitely important, definitely something that is essential, but it's also tricky to do. Because it needs to be... People need to deeply commit then to that as a concept for it to be part of them. And I suppose I want to bring it back to the fact that we've all lurched from fad to fad and things like that, and so people might worry that they overcommit almost psychologically themselves, or overcommit their time and their learning in that direction, like they might have done, say, like you said, acupuncture and manual therapy and things that we've all done, rather than embed it and commit to it and recognise that this is something that truly could underpin their understanding of their practice. Yeah.
I think there's a few things there. As a supervisee and going through the process of hoping to build on my MI skills, that's exactly the experience I had. Day one of training, I went home and had these conversations with my friends and family, and came back in and said, this is great, you can get them to do anything. And I remember Rory saying, whoa, wait a minute, there's some, let's highlight the spirit of MI again, and even, since having one-to-one supervision, it's been looking at, okay, you can have the skills, get people talking about change and reducing sustained talk and all this, but actually you've got to make sure you're, it is very other directed. You're making sure you're, emphasizing the autonomy in the patient. I think from physio perspective, we are talking to patients a lot, so why not talk to them in a way that's, guiding, and perhaps not see ourselves as just the expert, this person's coming in and what they need to do to change is within them. It sounds quite hippie-ish now as I'm saying it, but taking that perspective is quite different, I think, for physio, because I don't know about you, but in my training it was very much you are the expert. You go in as a problem solver and you help them solve their problems, and you tell them what to do about it, and they go away and do it. And this is quite a different way of approaching things. I think it was Rolnick that was saying about going in with problem glasses on, and instead of that, taking them off and putting on strengths glasses. So you're looking at a patient through a different lens almost. So is that a fad? I don't think so. I think that's just a way of conversing with someone that seems to me to be a lot more, again, that word, genuine, person-centred, but is very much about behaviour change, which is what physio is ultimately about.
And effective.
Yeah.
Let's remember there's an evidence base for this, for this method. And I guess that in terms of investing your time in a method that works, then you probably want to invest your time in a method that works, rather than just seeing it as a fad.
Because I think the time is precious for physios. A lot of I don't know what the feedback you get, Rory, is, there's not enough time to use MI. We've only got 20 minutes, that kind of thing. But the more and more I know about it, I'd rather talk to someone within that 20 minutes in a style that's in an MI style rather than just a...
Well, it's the best way to optimise your time, isn't it? Even if that is limited by the hard facts of your diary, then that is certainly something that I'd agree with. And it does apply more pressures to it, doesn't it? In a sense, is that you then start to. I personally, when I'm time pressured, would feel you're having to. I have to give up something. I admit when I'm time pressured, I have to recognise myself hurrying my own skill set along, and that's probably where it does become a bit more contrived. Is then I'm trying to go through the gears or the I forget all the mnemonics and things with the spirit and stuff, but the oars and the other. I won't be able to say what they stand for now, but generally speaking. That practicality it definitely brings me to my next question, which is, what do you feel are the clinical scenarios or circumstances in which you feel it's best applied? And although we're saying that really it's a framework in which could enhance our conversation, full stop, and I think the world would benefit greatly from engaging in conversation with a true listening and a true understanding of what that person in front of you knows that you don't know. And I've always said that when we started Physio Matters, the reason it became something that became easier to me and my team than we expected it to was because actually we realised that we were taking a subjective assessment. Essentially, we were finding out what they know that we don't know, and there needn't be a difference between a high-flung professor and a patient that we were seeing because they know stuff that we don't. And so that was why I know it kind of encompasses, and I'm almost anticipating that answer because I agree with it, but I want to know if we can try and zoom in a little bit and think what we feel are the most pertinent in physiotherapy particularly.
Thanks. Now I'm going to answer by being very general, like you just said.
Right,
no, but I suppose maybe one specific thing would be when we give information, because as physios we like to do that, and in supervision, Rory's often pointed out to me, because you can swing too far the other way of, I can only ever get someone talking about how they might change, and Rory pointed out that actually you have got expertise. It's okay to give people information, it's how you might do that. So perhaps one thing is about asking a patient what they know about something before even thinking about giving them information. So it might be, what do you know about exercising or, pacing, or because again, in the past, I've just gone for, this person needs to know about this now, and I'm going to tell them. And then I sort of sit back and go, great, they know that now. And then, no one knows what's happened. So it's asking, then it's saying, okay, after you've listened to them, would it be all right if I gave you a bit more information about that? And then it puts the patient in a position where they're saying, okay, do I want to hear this or not? I've had people say no, and that's fine. It saves you a lot of time talking, but it also makes you realise what sort of stage they're at in terms of how they want to manage things themselves, and that's really important. And then the crucial thing that I found is checking back with them after you've given that information, like, what's your understanding about what I've just said? I feel like I might be ranty now, but in terms of, we see a lot of referrals in pain team, I've explained to I've reassured the patient about their scan results, but actually what they've done is perhaps given some information and presumed that patient was reassured by it without doing the crucial bit of checking back. What do you think about what I've just said? Then things might come up from that around their understanding of the scan results, for example.
There's got to be a way of placing it in context, isn't there? If I was to try and sharpen up the specificity a little, if I can, to say, do you feel that there is a profile, for want of a better word, of patient in which it's more applicable than others? Persistent low back pain. Yesterday they sprained their ankle. Let's say acute ankle sprain versus persistent low back pain. Would you say that it's something that is as good for both of those?
I'm hearing that you want to pin me down, and I'm happy for you. Sorry, go on.
I've got a profile, but it doesn't relate to the clinical presentation. It relates to the presentation of the patient in front of you.
Sure.
So what we know from the evidence is more angry, more resistant clients tend to do best with motivational interviewing. So I think listening and looking at the patient in front of you and seeing that for every suggestion you offer or for every exercise you've offered, they've not done it, or they're giving you a reason why they couldn't do it, you say, right, I know the evidence is that this sort of person probably responds best to motivational interviewing. And we have some theory on why that might be as well. But, that, I think, looking beyond the physio for now and looking at the dynamic between the helper and the person being helped is, if they're angry and they're a bit pissed off, then probably motivational interviewing is the time.
Because I've read some... Sorry, go on.
No, so then hearing that's probably why, as a pain service, we had Rory to come in, because chronic pain patients have obviously had a long journey of seeing lots of different people, perhaps, and maybe...
And they've
got angry.
They've got plenty to be legitimately pissed off about.
Exactly.
As well. The amount of times that we've made mistakes on their behalf and talked at them or thought for them, and so that's totally understandable. Just I have read some of that work. I feel, and because it feels familiar, but I wouldn't be able to quote it. But and when I was reading it, it was hard because you're trying to identify a causal relationship to what is it about that makes it so effective with those people. And it almost does when I've then practiced it, again, to go back to the practice, it just takes them by surprise. And it's such a lateral move in a way that you are, and you're being very genuinely compassionate, and you use language such as, but yet you're still here. What do you mean? Well, despite all that, there's plenty of there that sounds really difficult. You're still sat here, and thanks for that. That's really good, and you're really meaning it. I've had 2 people cancel this morning, and the fact that you're here is good. That just it startles them in such a way that they've not necessarily anticipated that before.
Yeah.
Does it work though? Because I think that's a mechanism that we're both nodding enough about. If we all get better as a society at that, then we do lose some of that in a sense. Because if every person that they've encountered through that process, you'd hope they wouldn't be as angry. That's a fair point. But almost when I've smuggled that in and sideswiped them and stuff, they've not encountered that before. That surprise element goes down, and so might we find the effectiveness does drop off in a weird way because you've not got that step change between an MI practitioner having good conversation and the status quo.
It's a brilliant question. Yeah,
Thank you.
I really like that question, and I like it because often, and you talked about fads, often when you look at the evidence of various interventions like CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, now we've got acceptance and commitment therapy, the so-called third wave, CBTs, behavioural interventions. They all lose their effectiveness over time when you start looking at randomised controlled trials. And part of the reason for that is because the trials get more and better and better quality. Yeah, so with better quality trials, we know that the effectiveness is often diminished. Yeah, it's overstated early on. But there is some thought that also, as it becomes more prolific in society, you get a bit wise to it, which is what you're suggesting. I think motivational interviewing might be different, and I think there's some very recent theoretical ideas around motivational interviewing. Is that from an evolutionary perspective, we grew up in communities, in social. That's how we managed to excel, and our brain development, went alongside being part of social groups. And in those social groups, we tend to have social ranks, yeah? And so people are constantly, looking at each other to figure out who's the top dog, who's the bottom dog, and they're trying to relate to each other, but they're also trying to cooperate. And so these two processes going on of cooperation and competition in social groups. And I think what motivational interviewing does, and Bill's described it as a power-yielding approach. It yields power, to the client. And so you've just described that situation. The client comes in. You're not going to tell me how to change. You yield power by saying, well, it's amazing that you've come. The client steps down. And you're wondering whether that'd be less effective the more we do it, yeah? Well, I think that the other process that's going on that we know is important in evolution is the cooperation. And I'm not sure that loses its power. I think that social groups cooperating actually improves society more generally. So I think that, you'll probably see less resistance, and more amenability in your patients, but who wouldn't want to see that? I don't think it's going to lose its effect. You might need to spend less time actively thinking in your head, I must yield power, because you're just embodying it. And certainly here, it sounds like you embody that as an organisation, so you probably don't have to do it as often, specifically in your own mind. Yeah?
And you're also, in a sense, there's an expectation of practice in which, especially if someone's been referred through to us and things like that, we've noticed that as there's a culture of practice that then means that you're naturally finding people coming that while still angry at the world and angry at the condition and sometimes angry at the profession or whatever it might be, this sometimes that you've got that opportunity sometimes to take that avenue where they're not yet angry at you, so don't make them so. I think and hope you're right, and I was forcing myself into that devil's advocacy position more than anything, because I think it's something that really, there's certainly more pros than cons to embedding that within society. And I describe it interprofessionally with some of the scrapes that we get into as being just affording people that charity and really understanding, truly understanding their point and position before you then try to confront it. This idea of really truly listening rather than just waiting to talk again, which is something that I'm sure it's a quote from beyond him, but my mentor and friend Mike Stewart has used an awful lot, where he's just saying that there's such a difference between just waiting around and actually truly engaging and listening and affording that person the charity to tell them what they know, tell you what they know. When it comes to I'm not going to force another specific clinical example, but it's like, do you feel that there's best evidence either from practice or from the literature that supports the use of motivational interviewing in any particular presentations of patients in an MSK setting?
I think perhaps Rory'd know more about this, but certainly you've pointed me towards some articles with low back pain, exercise as well, diabetes, I think, management as well, and physical activity. So that kind of area.
Compliance in sort of undertaking, moving from an inactive state to a more active state. So there's been some, big sort of implementations of there's something called the Let's Get Moving program. I don't know if you've heard of that, but that's the national rollout in the NHS. And that came on the back of an evaluation that targeted inactive people in GPs, and its core intervention is motivational interviewing. So you see a coach in the GP who has a 60-minute consultation with you, and then they hopefully refer you on to a local leisure facility to become more active. And certainly the evidence there is that people do become more active, and also their psychological health improves as well. So I think there's evidence on moving from an inactive place to a more active place. Macmillan Cancer have also done a large rollout of motivational interviewing across their the whole of the country, and I've been involved a little bit in training some cancer workers in that. And again, motivational interviewing conversations about moving from an inactive place to an active place, and that's led to.
I think that sharpens up the actual. The answer I'm hearing throughout those is it's all about that behaviour change, and therefore it would be a falsehood to try to narrow it almost to a condition. But as is the nature of trying to apply clinical trials to things is that we do need
Yeah.
control groups and active participation groups, in which that then one of the ways that we typically delineate people is by their injury or ailment. And
That's
condition.
certainly how things are set up at the moment. Yeah, I mean the biomedical sort of.
There's been
angle.
studies in Hong Kong looking at exercise compliance in lower back pain, and the motivational interviewing intervention group showed improved compliance and alliance with the workers that were working with them as compared to the no MI intervention group. So
yeah, I mean some of the work that's done en masse within certain workplaces and things. I've been in the Occy Health stuff that I've been doing a bit more reading on recently, where it's so clear that a community that's engaging with therapists or other counsellors even that are being consistent is a massive thing, and we talk about a lot on this show is that the disparate nature and the unwarranted variability between clinicians and what they're then suggesting. This is another area where that consistency between, say, fellow co-workers or especially in patient group circumstances, that consistency can really help to breed some sense and some sensibility within that framework. I think that's really nice. So what I'd like to just touch on is, if we're unable to go on a full qualification or learn motivational interviewing formally through some of the channels that you'd mentioned before, and that both of you have obviously explored to different degrees so far, is what is the best way to learn it with, say, limited time or money? How might people go about doing that?
I think when you hear motivational interviewing, it's recognisable as a conversation, yeah, and it seems really, really simple, and it is, because it's about asking questions, it's about offering reflections back when you're listening, and so consequently, I think sometimes people think that, yeah, I could do a short course in this, or go online and do a sort of YouTube sort of videos, and then I could do motivational interviewing. And I think the issue with that is to come back to the very early point that sometimes then it becomes a mechanical facade. Yeah,
Sure.
I can do motivational interviewing. So I think ultimately there have been some research studies that have shown that 2 days can lead to some practice change in people, so going on a 2-day course, yeah, but that tends to diminish and drop off within 3 months of their practice. Other studies, a very large alcohol trial in the UK, found that you needed 200 hours of supervised practice to really embody motivational interviewing, to become what they describe as competent on a measure of competency. So I'm reluctant to sort of say, there's some apps and there's a YouTube, but there are some, and I'll mention them for the listeners to go and have a look at. There's a great app by the American Academy of Pediatrics that's about reducing obesity in children, and it's called Change Talk, and that's a self-learning app. So it's free. You can download it and do some practice exercises on there. But ultimately, and I think both you and Maddy were sort of alluding to this, just like any skill, I presume the same in physio, that looking at maybe Joe Wicks or whatever online, doing an exercise program isn't going to put me in the posture that I actually need to be in, because I actually need someone overlooking me saying, actually, your back leg's not quite high enough, yeah? And it's the same in motivational interviewing. I need to be listening to somebody doing the interaction so that I can then give them feedback. So I think training and supervision is the only way to become competent at motivational interviewing, but there are lots of ways of getting free sort of online app related. There's a book called Building Motivational Interviewing Skills by David Rosengren. It's brilliant. It's an interactive book. You go backwards and forwards with the book and you do exercises. So it's as close as you could get to having a supervisor, but not having one. So I think there are ways. But
and it's the supervision process is a hugely humbling experience as well, and it takes a lot of bravery and role play and going. I've never seen someone really develop the competence without braving that role play, and that is something that even on on courses that I've run and been on, there is an active sigh from corners of any room when they have to then or are expected or hope to do some sort of role play. It really is some people's Achilles heel. So what do you feel that that's something that we can that just it's an essential piece, or do you feel that there are any?
I think I mean, from obviously I can only talk from my own experience, having done a 3-day course with Rory that took me to a certain point, but definitely you can read books, you can listen to podcasts that are out there, but having sort of supervision, so recording conversations that you have obviously with consent with patients and listening back to them. Makes me feel sweaty just talking about it right now, but it's really uncomfortable, but it really is a great way to just reflect back on whether you're using the skills, and obviously having someone else who's embodies MI to look in on that and supervise you with that, I'd say is definitely the way forward.
Wash, rinse, repeat practice.
Of course.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, here in Manchester, the University of Manchester have started the Manchester Motivational Interviewing Network, which you can, there's a website, miin.co.uk, and that is a free network to try to roll out motivational interviewing, quality motivational interviewing training and supervision for anyone in this region, really. So there are sort of free ways of trying to improve your quality in motivational interviewing. The organisation I belong to, Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers, MINT, which is an international organisation of trainers, is all about quality. And in the spirit of motivational interviewing, it's also about generosity. So the people who are running the MIIN are all MINT trainers, and so there are ways of getting good quality training, but it doesn't necessarily mean just going on YouTube and watching some clips.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of the toughest things I have with concepts such as this, where we want people to understand it, embody it where possible, but at least not be disparaging, or this idea that it's just the polar opposite to I call a spade, and then this is just all waffly, airy-fairy, hippie-ish you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So at the very least, we're stopping people being dismissive.
Yeah.
However, there's then this, when you're doing that, you're only going to get a certain amount of people that will then pursue the angles that we're describing. We hope more. But then in the middle, you just don't want that to be a milquetoast and therefore poor version that then is almost worse than not knowing it. And I suppose that's the middle ground I want to just throw out there, is that I do fear that bad MI or becomes condescending conversation, some of the challenges that I mentioned earlier, almost worse than them not trying. And there were better conversationalists as standard before they started to dabble. And that's a fear of mine. Have you anything that can put my mind at rest?
I mean, I suppose once you know some of the micro skills, obviously you should have an understanding of the spirit as well, but you'll know if it's perhaps not going well, because the person you're talking to will probably respond in a way that might make, hopefully, if you're someone that's truly empathetic and have a sort of ability to build rapport with someone, which we hope therapists do. I'm hoping that you'll just learn from that and just be someone that's reflective on their own practice.
I think the core skill of motivational interviewing is listening. So it's, like you said, it's not just sitting there passively listening. It's an active process of really trying to get into the head of that client. Why aren't they undertaking this exercise? What would be their key value and goal, that their cherished opportunity that might lead to them taking up this exercise? Yeah, so that's what the core skill of motivational interviewing is. I don't think you can do much harm with that. Yeah, so if people are walking away from a short course on motivational interviewing, and just for 2 minutes, and I often make very, very, small goals. If just for 2 minutes at the beginning of the consultation, or maybe 3-5 minutes, they give up their agenda and they just wholly focus on listening and handing back what they're hearing, which is a skill in itself, but if they can just try to do that, I don't think they're going to do any harm. Yeah.
Sure.
So I don't think it's quite right to say that, you know, done badly, it could be harmful. I think you're right. Yeah. If I'm just throwing off affirmations right, left and centre, then they're going to look at you really oddly. But like you say, they're not going to come back. Yeah. So you know,
there's going to be some feedback mechanisms that you can learn from and hopefully adapt to. But and you're right. It's the faith in a professional being able to be being able to assess the external feedback that they're receiving and some of the internal feedback of the awkwardness of conversation.
Yes.
Hopefully will then be sufficient to change their minds. So yeah, I'm heartened by that. I'm really good. Thank you for that. That's great. Are there any external constraints that really restrict its use or utility? We mentioned time being a classic one that's thrown out there, but we've kind of already visited that a bit.
What I'm feeling throughout this whole interview is a theme, yeah. And the theme for me is that motivational interviewing is just a conversation. It's a really good conversation, yeah, where you don't annoy the other person and you give them an opportunity to think about, why would I undertake a different path in life, yeah? So I guess I'd flip the question back to you and say, what external constraints would there be on having conversations? You know, and that really is the question. And then the answer might be something like, well, where there's English as a second language, you know, that's often a problem, yeah. Where you have a partner or a family member, you know, at the side of you or even at home, offering a completely different perspective all the time, maybe in the interview, interrupting and, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah, sure.
Or maybe where there's an intellectual disability and you need to change the way that you're conversing, yeah, so that you can actually sort of, you know, motivational interviewing is a language-heavy intervention, and so if people have less language for whatever reason, then you're going to have to think about what you're doing there.
Is there a difficult, because I think reciprocity in a sense of being able to have that give or take, that balance, and therefore the enjoyment in that conversation can sometimes be an external restraint I'm thinking of, and by that I'm just meaning that they could not necessarily be someone that particularly enjoys articulating themselves, and you're trying to tease something out of them that they don't necessarily. I'm not talking necessarily about the people that are withdrawn from opening up. I'm just meaning that their style of discourse isn't necessarily in that direction. So you've almost got this personality trait or language style approach that I can think of as a restraint in any conversation, including these ones.
I think that's another great point that you're making, you know, that, and really what you're saying is they're not conversationalists, that's their style. Absolutely. And so, you know, you have to go back to that question, you know, that this is a style of conversation. Is it going to meet the needs of the person in front of you? Not for everyone, is there a hard and fast rule? I'm just trying to think of the evidence here, whether there's any evidence on that. I mean, you know, working as I do with young people, you know, adolescents are frequently like that, you know, yes, no responses if you're not careful. And the truth is that motivational interviewing gives them an opportunity to open up, coming back to that evolutionary stuff, that MI is really reducing the feeling of threat in the person in front of you. You're no longer this powerful expert, you're yielding the power. So I suspect that some of those people whose style isn't to be chatty, there probably is a reason for that. And if you're truly yielding your power and you're truly listening to where they're at, then actually you can meet them with where they're at. But it might not suit everyone, I think.
Yeah, I was just thinking clinically using MI, perhaps not. I don't have that sense with people. I mean, I come across a lot of people who you've described, really. And I suppose if you're using MI, like you say, it tends to get them to sort of open up and generate more conversation than they perhaps might have. I mean, I was just thinking of, I see a lot of people with low mood as well. And if they're very, very low in mood, as you were sort of alluding to, that can potentially make it seem more difficult from the start. But once you talk to them, like you say, in a way that meets them where they're at, then something sort of comes from from that point.
I think I'm parroting some of the tougher questions that I've been asked when trying to advocate for this style of conversation, and not necessarily just in motivational interviewing, but one of the common questions I've had been best known for interviewing actual experts, and therefore if there was any expertise that I have, it's supposedly being able to have what seem to be interesting conversations that I put on the internet that are of a duration that usually surprise people in a sense, how it held my attention compared to others that are 20-minute snippets that people can comprehend, getting some clinical juice in that time, whereas these are taking a bit more depth. So I'm often asked, but when I'm asked that question as but you get conversationalists on your podcast and have a thing where they clearly open up, and you have sometimes in detail conversations about their career journey and the twists and turns and their imposter syndromes that they've experienced. So I'm heartened again by your answer, in the sense that I think you give a better answer to that than I have when I'm asked it, is that my concern is that we do sometimes cherry pick, but there's no harm. As you've said, it almost can't be a hindrance if you're just giving them the space to. And if they don't want to take that, you're not forcing that on them. You're not not moving on until they open up and
exactly,
because of course
tissue, so they're going to be in tears. You're not trying to bait that out of them in a hard counselling style.
No, and of course that's why Rory was saying it's a conversational style, and the spirit of it isn't about trying to get them to talk or change or do something. It's very much other directed. So
it would sound very different to this podcast, wouldn't it? With the quiet client, there would be a lot more space for silence, and there would also be offers from me as the practitioner to maybe guessing what's going on in that silence, you don't sound too sure that you want to take this exercise up, because you've just noticed them look at the floor when you suggested that they do something, and so it would sound very different to this, and although it's a conversation, it's not the same type of conversation with each client. It's going to be very different.
Sure. No, that's great. And can it be used as a one-off intervention, or effective if it's delivered once, if there was a circumstance in which someone was, especially I'm thinking about the format that I see that being is sort of GP consultations, or these first contact practitioner consultations that we're seeing more of, but also triage clinics and things like that, where you might be seeing a complex case that you might, just because of the nature of your diary, mean that you might only see them that one time. Do you feel that it's something that can be effectively used, and has that been measured?
Absolutely. I mean, Sune Rubak has done research in Denmark on GPs and, brief consultations, and has also done a meta-analysis of lots of studies. I think they ended up 70 or so RCTs in that paper that's published in the British Journal of General Practice, and 3/4 of those studies are just evaluating a 60-minute intervention. So motivational interviewing is a brief intervention by definition, nearly. When Bill did the largest therapy trial of its kind ever in America of any therapy, which was with people, heavy drinkers in America, where they were comparing CBT against AA, 12-step Alcoholics Anonymous, versus motivational interviewing. When Bill wrote the manual, he wanted 2 sessions of MI, because if you're encouraging the person in front of you to decide for themselves what they're going to do with their lives, then that doesn't take much time. They're there, they think about it, and then they make a decision. So, but the trial organisers said, we can't have 2 sessions versus 12 of AA and 12 of CBT. That's just not fair, Bill. And he said, well, okay, I'll add an extra 2 sessions, and we'll do something with that. And that's what led to something called motivational enhancement therapy, which is a manualised version of motivational interviewing, but only because he was sort of pressed over a barrel.
Being forced into a framework more than that.
Yeah, exactly. So brief is exactly what it is, and some of those encounters, it's effective in GP consultations up to 15 minutes. So
great. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
And I'm just thinking of all the physios that are getting these new roles in first contact, and speaking with them in department, I hear things like, obviously naturally I'm worried that I'm going to miss something, in terms of red flag screening and things like that. And I say to them, yeah, I get that. And to a certain extent, as long as you've screened for that, that's fine. But really also think about, this is the first interaction you're going to have with someone, because now in my clinical specialist role, I'm seeing people 20 years down the line who've had an initial consultation that took them down a certain route and journey. So I'm saying, look, just don't create, problems for these people that, don't do any harm in terms of that sense. And I really see MI as a way of them getting down to the root of what this person wants at that first moment.
Yeah, first do no harm is
exactly
that we've got to remind ourselves of sometimes.
But I do worry with that idea that people then, your listeners, go away thinking, oh, this is a airy-fairy, sit back, do no harm. Yeah, well, anyone can do that. But the truth is, it's not. It's a very directive method, which is actually using listening skills to very quickly get to the root of the problem, so that you don't miss anything. That's the irony. And I love the quote from Monty Roberts that says that act like you've got all day, act like you've got 15 minutes and it'll take you all day, act like you've got all day and it'll take you 15 minutes. And this is the point, that the style within which you go into a consultation will allow the information to come. Whereas if you go in with a need to screen for this, and a need
your
to
agenda,
tick your boxes, then you're not going to find anything out, because the patient won't tell you anything.
And Maddy, when we're thinking about the roles in which that I've worked in myself, where you are sharpened in your medical understanding, not wanting to miss things and stuff. That is it's almost tempting to go down the route in which you then become almost linear, objective, algorithmic.
Sort of, and that's the way certainly I was trained. It was very much, let's problem solve. Let's see how we can tell this person what they need to do, and then it'll all be fine. And screen for anything that's more sinister. Obviously there are those pressures on physios now, but as Rory said, if you go in with that, you're going to take that client down a certain route of that sort of, don't want to say it, biomedical sort of route, potentially. Whereas if you'd taken the time in a style that was looking at, okay, what's going on for this patient right now, and what can I help them understand what they want to do about it, in a way that you talk to them, then that's potentially more helpful.
We have I think a major problem it's a major problem or still a major perceived problem with the difference in what people see as being the expectation of patients, what they're asking of MSK clinicians and pain clinicians, and
definitely.
There is still, and I think this is why I said it's a problem or perceived problem, or probably a bit of both, in a sense that there is sometimes patients will sit in front of us with certain expectations for interventional care, something that they might have been biomedicalized in a sense that they're doing that, but given the chance to, they might articulate a different desire for that consultation than you're assuming on them. And
also, of course, that stuff's fine. Like Rory's pointed out to me, we can do our, whatever we want to do, hands-on stuff. But I don't know, I suppose, thinking of a physio that that you think, they're just really good. Quite often it is that they're empathetic and they're a good listener and they build that rapport, all that sort of thing. I don't know what you think. People that you've seen that seem to...
Well, they help the penny to drop quicker. They've got different tactics that engage with a person on an individual level and truly care about what they're saying. And by doing so, the pennies drop. So I do agree. And I suppose that I'm smuggling these questions in just as a means of thinking that my suspicion of the answers as they've come is that it is not an airy-fairy intervention that takes a duration for someone that eventually that will unlock something. It actually gives people the space to probably press fast forward on a conversation that they would have. There's this sometimes that you imagine. it was a patient that we've had that we'll hopefully get on the podcast as well. We're doing some more patient podcasts.
Well, that's great.
soon.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
And they sort of said to me about how that the basic sort of conversational tropes that we all have of just how's your day, how are you, a bit of a recap on last time I had this problem and I want to tell the story. Not without being given that space. They sometimes will naturally feel that there's an obligation to go somewhere before they'll actually, and they'll hope that by the end of the consultation they'll get there. And if they're not given that chance, they won't do that. Whereas in MI, I suppose the opportunity for them to bring that forward as a priority, that warmth is given, that atmosphere is given earlier than it might have done in a otherwise consultation.
Yeah, and of course it's not just that. I'm saying that as if, just empathise and everything will be fine. No, it's not just that. The difference with MI is it is about behaviour change.
Sure, it goes that way. Yeah, it's not just about this.
And the way that you listen, you guide the conversation. I'm choosing what I hand back to what the patient has said. So if they've talked about their route to the clinic today, and at the same time they've talked about the pain that they felt when they got on the bus, well, I've got a choice. Which do I hand back to them in my active listening? Well, I'm going to hand back the back pain so that we get there quick, But in doing that, they feel like they're the ones who are totally in the driving seat, and to a certain extent they are, because if they don't want to talk about it, they can carry on talking about the bus, but it's more likely that they're going to talk about their pain. So it is a very directive approach that will be shaping the consultation and get somewhere quicker than it does if you were to lock horns with them with an agenda that you've brought.
And something I always wondered about with that was, does that feel a bit manipulative that I am? But actually, we're having conversations with people anyway. So you're kidding yourself if you don't realise that you're actually having an effect on someone because you're already conversing with them. So why not do it in a way?
That's more unethical, I'd say. If you're in a conversation and you don't know what the impact of each of your utterances is having on the person in front of you, then you're not really thinking about what you're doing.
It's this myth that without it's neutral.
Yeah. Yes.
There isn't an implicit power dynamic on the fact that they've been in your waiting area. As a professional, and their vulnerability, regardless of, and I don't mean in a patronising way. I mean especially the patients that we'll see that have, especially say complex pain issues, they have an inherent vulnerability to the sense of self that we know from the evidence. That therefore, if we weren't to know that power dynamic is there, it's not as if this has got any weight to it. Which is why it comes back to that idea that it's so unlikely to have a hindrance effect unless you were to plough on without responding to the feedback.
Which it wouldn't be MI.
Exactly, and then it sort of solves its own problem, doesn't it? With that, just wondered if, at the moment as it stands, how well integrated is motivational interviewing in education of healthcare professionals, be that through allied health and medicine and beyond, and if not, why not?
I think that a lot of I'd be interested to hear about physiotherapy education, but certainly in my world of clinical psychology, that teaching is reliant on a local population of experts who then go and provide teaching within the NHS. And so I provide teaching on the local University of Liverpool course, on the University of Manchester course, and my interest is motivational interviewing, so they get a good dose of that. And I suspect that a lot of for instance, the Manchester Motivational Interviewing Network has been established by an educational psychologist at the University of Manchester with an interest in motivational interviewing. So like any education, I suspect it's reliant on there being enthusiasts in those areas. Is that okay? Is that right to have sort of different syllabuses across the country dependent on the experts that are in those universities? Maybe that's all right to have a diverse population of experts. I guess obviously being an MI enthusiast and thinking it should be a conversation style that is a backdrop to all interventions for all health professionals, which is what I do in my NHS trust. I think it should be on everyone's syllabuses.
But and it sounds like, I understand your diplomacy in a sense with that, but it's also that if you feel that the evidence is sufficiently strong enough, then that's something that if we want evidence-informed policy, evidence-informed syllabus, I always, what's the plural of syllabus?
Syllabi.
Syllabi.
Doesn't sound quite right.
I'm going to go syllabuses.
We'll go with that.
But it should be therefore embedded, more integrated, and the postcode lottery does concern me, not just in education, but the way that might bleed out into the community, as we know it does. You know, the locality of those experts might be working in teaching practice, but also then clinically. That concerns me when we know that some of the non-city demographics are struggling with health, with various different chronic diseases that almost are most in need of these sorts of change interventions or change inspiring interventions.
Yeah.
I think it's worth, I mean, certainly the evidence on very specific interventions in specific populations in musculoskeletal sort of settings, probably isn't there to recommend that every single physio does this. If you look at the example of alcohol, where the effect is huge, and brief interventions are recommended by the World Health Organization for anyone drinking at hazardous levels, then anyone that comes into contact with anyone who would be drinking at hazardous levels should be trained in motivational interviewing or brief interventions, which are a sort of cousin. And that is nearly everyone, to be honest, in the NHS, certainly in the sorts of populations I work with, definitely in mental health, probably in chronic pain.
Yeah, I was going to say for chronic conditions, in terms of the research, if you take that as a general term, the research is there, isn't it? So then if I'm working in obviously persistent pain, it's a chronic condition, you can sort of generalise it into that. I mean, there's the MI in healthcare book, which I don't know whether there might be an updated version.
I think there's going to be an updated MI in healthcare book in the next year or so.
Okay. And how well do you think it's? Do you think it is?
Well, I was just thinking, I've trained a while back, so there's nothing then. As I said, my master's, I mean, it's just tiny survey of physios in North Wales, but certainly that came out of it, looking at the research, that MI might be helpful in training. There's a new physio course coming out local to me, and I've been involved talking with the head of that course about how they might want to integrate MI into the communication aspects of the training. But I am saying exactly what you said there. I am an MI enthusiast in that area. That's at that one level, isn't it? And I work in North Wales. People who have chronic conditions, they speak to me in a conversational style of MI. But again, it's just because I had the training with Rory, and I had,
isn't it? I think we're also guided by the NICE guidelines. Certainly in the NHS, on what would be best practice, and the NICE guidelines are very clear that anyone coming across hazardous alcohol use should be using motivational interviewing. As far as I am aware, there are no NICE guidelines on physios using it in certain musculoskeletal conditions.
And that's where it becomes more condition specific, which is what's interesting, because our NICE guidelines say OA knee, chronic low back pain. I think this one coming out shoulder, I think. But essentially, because they're condition specific, I wonder if it will be that a NICE panel might require the specificity of research is then at least of that diagnostic code, which we know is naturally, it will come to some extent, but the underlying premise we started with, which was that we're trying to instigate behaviour change, and that if that's where the general in practice probably does need to be applied. I don't see why we can't do that.
There is a NICE guideline. I think it's a NICE guideline on. It's called behaviour change at community and population, community, and individual levels. PH. Can't remember what the code is, and it's a public health guideline, and motivational interviewing and behaviour change counselling is a method that's recommended in there, which is really how the Let's Get Moving programme, I think, has come about, that's been nationally rolled out to improve inactivity. So there are some guidelines out there that you would then expect quite a few physical therapists to be working in Let's Get Moving sort of type programmes.
One other thing. Oh, go on.
No, I was just saying that I know we're now talking about healthcare and training and evidence-based and stuff, but I'm feeling something inside me about coming back to that thing that you were saying about it arose from just experiencing that this is actually helpful. And I know you've got to put some sort of evidence and theory behind it, but equally it's just so frustrating for me as a physio because I'm like, this works. And you know,
I think whilst my bias is in that direction too, but I've heard that plenty from people that espouse quackery, and so you end up in this difficulty where Robin McKenzie that famously laid in prone or had a patient laying prone on a bed that hadn't been laid flat before, and then from that inferred that had therefore pushed his disc back in mechanically. And whilst there's some utility to some of the position-specific stuff that he then came up with, he attributed cause in his work to something that was a mechanism that, had it have just been looked into a little more deeply, it works. It wasn't that necessarily the position. So again, just being the skeptic again, I suppose that's why people like me will always probably look on, even if the evidence continues in the direction of travel it is and demonstrates it works for behaviour change. And as I say, that's where my bias lies too. That here it works far too much from things that it's like, I don't think the magic medicine is where you think it is in that interaction.
And of course for physio, it works is a very much in the past has been, because now they can extend or not. But of course this is a very different approach. This is about a conversational style and behaviour change. It's not about, are you now able to, extend this amount? It's different.
Yeah, but we would want hard outcomes as well, presumably.
Yeah.
Well, I don't
Otherwise
know.
you wouldn't be doing it.
Functional ability presumably doesn't relate necessarily to extending. I mean, I'm not a physiotherapist, so I'm not even going to begin to start talking in those words.
Back to a clinical example then, you would want people to be saying, okay, now I'm going to start pacing myself. I'm going to plan my day. I'm going to take some time out. And if you wanted someone to be looking at how they pace activity, to manage chronic pain. So that would be the behavioural outcome in physio that you would be looking for, if that's what was relevant between the two of you in that conversation.
Specific, reasonable functional goals, didn't they? They actually, if they came in saying, I want to... or they recognise the need to be more active or be able to...
or previously they've been pushing into their pain and battling it. Then they start talking about, maybe this isn't working for me and maybe I do need to take a step back and plan things and maybe I need to prioritise what I'm doing. That kind of stuff would be the hard outcome of the conversation, if that makes sense.
It does. My final question for you, Maddy, on the specifics with regards to the physio stuff is one of the big challenges I noticed when I first studied MI and then also have encountered whenever I've advocated for it, which is essentially what I found myself doing generally with regards to it being a good conversation style. I'm very reassured by the fact that we've kind of agreed that, because I've met other MI enthusiasts that have felt that by me suggesting in that direction that sort of diminishes the specificity, and while we seem to have visited both quite nicely there, that it's good conversation but it can also have a format that's relevant. It's not just
no.
that. But what I wanted to ask is that there's people that feel that the core factor affecting their inability to change in the direction that they want is pain. Mm-hmm. So this is where I am now speaking to you.
This is a deeper conversation.
Sorry, I know.
No.
I know it's a bit of a tough thing for me to try and bait a soundbite from you on, but it's just that there's this idea that they feel that is the thing that needs
I think
to change.
then we would get into more of a conversation. I mean, I work for a pain service and we use ACT as an approach. And I think you probably know what that's about.
The listeners should know a little bit as well. I think we've covered that a few times. Acceptance and commitment therapy.
Yeah, so what we're saying is it's different to perhaps, I don't know, lots of pain teams work differently. For some pain teams it might be, okay, how can we help you reduce or get rid of this pain? For our service it's saying, okay, if this is here, how it is, not saying it might not change in the future, but if this is how it is here for you right now, what would it look like to not battle against it, but just sort of see it as it is, and then have a better quality of life in line with what you value in life, still having it there. So that conversation would need to be had within an MI conversation, if that makes sense. Does that answer the question?
It does. I suppose I wondered if that might be the direction of travel of your answer, because it's those sorts of people that feel that the pain is the key barrier. I can see what you mean about ACT, and that you need them to come to accept that. Let's say that didn't change. Therefore, you say that your pain was in a situation where this has been something that's been ongoing for a while. Let's see how we could work around that. In circumstances where they feel that they aren't ready, or it's not even appropriate for them to necessarily accept that persistent pain is in their future, they're the ones, I suppose, the middle ground situation where they still hold out what's a fairly reasonable hope for their pain, not just to be manageable, but to be significantly less encroaching on their life.
Yeah, so I wonder whether we're talking about like the difference between sustained talk and resistance and things like that. It's very hard to say without that person being in front of me, but I suppose I would be just reflecting back where they're at, really, and how hard it is. If I felt that they were talking a lot about not being on board with self-management. Does that make sense?
But also I don't work in a pain clinic, and you can interview.
You've met us though, haven't you?
Of course, I've worked with your pain clinic for at least 6 months. But pain is a complex phenomenon that has both psychological and physical aspects to it, and I think that really what you're saying is that by working on the psychological, that you are impacting on pain, and to use an example from my own practice, that I had someone who was addicted to opiates, misusing opiates, which is a common situation in chronic pain, and focusing on their motivation in life, to actually be a productive member of society, led to them getting involved in an employment service, where they actually gained some employment and started the process of moving into the armed forces. Now, obviously, you can't be addicted to opiates in the armed forces. And so tolerating the pain, or even maybe a modulation of that pain, happened over time because it was so important that they got into the armed forces. And so I guess the role of both ACT and motivational interviewing, this has also been written about, that there's a synergy between the two, is that you're helping people to clarify their values, and in doing so, they become more motivated to carry with them distresses and strains along with them. Like you getting involved in exercise here, it's going to be a bit of a pain fitting it in, but is it important enough? That's the question, and why would you be doing it? So,
and I think that's difficult as a physio, just thinking about the listeners again of in a musculoskeletal outpatient department, we're back again to talking about that expectation of what that physio's there for. I just need this pain gone before I could do anything. And so that very radical different approach to it of, okay,
will be very difficult for both the patient and some of the workers.
If this suffering is going to be here, how can we work with that? And as a side effect, you might find that the pain becomes less of a
And I picked a nasty question for the end there, didn't I? Because it is a tricky one. That is another podcast in itself.
Yes, exactly. It is.
Where pain meets it. So I totally accept, but it was just, and your answers, by the way, are great, and I think we'll give the listeners some heart in that there are discussions that can be had around that, rather than it being, oh yeah, by the way, glad you mentioned that, Jack, don't use it if the patient is in this space, or pain is the thing that they see as being the causal link to their lack of behaviour. Then don't use it. Of course, I didn't think that would be the answer, but similarly, I know that is a complex nexus of different factors, both psychological and otherwise, full biopsychosocial factors affecting those sorts of variables. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to find out a little bit about what you guys might want to point people in the direction of. But before I do, is there anything else that you wanted to cover that we haven't done yet on air?
No, I think you've done a brilliant job.
Yeah.
Because
I know that we did sort of... I missed a couple, but because
we went back. I like this as a three as well. It's quite nice observing both of your MI skills back and forth to each other. The good reflections.
No, I hope they're ingrained. But now I'm going to listen to this back and kick myself, because unfortunately this is amusingly. I do find myself at least having to interrupt more than I would.
Oh yeah, yeah, of course.
And the atmosphere as well, with regards to how the microphones are set and things. It's an interesting phenomenon to observe, and I hope the listeners have enjoyed that, and hope that this has been a productive conversation from afar as well as it has. It's been very enjoyable to be part of. Where would you point people in the direction for your work?
Well, I've already mentioned the Manchester Motivational Interviewing Network for their own training, free training. There's motivationalinterviewing.com, which is the organisation I belong to, Mint, and in being generous, all of those experiences I've had from Mint members, Steve, Bill, everyone out there, have contributed really to this, to who I am. Mm-hmm. I've got my own website. If people want to read more about motivational interviewing, it's roryallott.com. I think we've mentioned apps and stuff.
We do.
Yeah. There's also it's worth mentioning. Steve Rolnick's got a BMJ learning module. So if you go to the BMJ website, and there's a learning module on there that's about an hour and 15 minutes. I wanted to mention that because if people want to watch full videos of Steve doing MI with people in a GP setting, then they can.
I can recommend those highly. Yeah, I've seen those clips and they are really nice. I mean, nowhere near as good as the calibre we just did, but they're similarly good to watch.
So
don't get me wrong. Maddy,
well, I'm just glad that Rory mentioned, his website, and from a personal point of view, he's a great trainer. So it sounds cringe, but I genuinely do want to say that, he's inspired me and sparked my enthusiasm for MI.
That's
and then
nice of you to say.
And then on my notes here, I've put desperate and sad. Motivational Mad is my Instagram, and at Motivational Mad for Twitter is
brilliant. Repeat those for me.
At Motivational Mad and Motivational Mad on Instagram.
Fantastic.
Desperate for followers.
No, get Maddy followed. For
no,
sure.
I do want to be an enthusiast for MI in healthcare. So this is what I'm aiming to promote.
You're a brilliant advocate for it as well, because you're. Every other sentence you're applying it. This is the thing we talked about, and it's been part of the reason I think it's been such a productive conversation is because we've had that balance where we've not got stuck in the weeds on theory. We've been applying it as we go, and I don't want you to take for granted the fact that you've been able to guide that conversation for us. You've been the one to have that expertise in both camps, and so thanks you for that. It's been an absolute privilege and pleasure to have you on, and so please do follow these guys across social media. Do you have Rallott.
That's my Twitter handle, RALLOTT.
Brilliant. And these will be all in the show notes, and the resources that we'll provide include some of the reference material that's come up in the conversation. And I'm sure there'll be different clips of this, including my attempt to be a good, well-behaved person. At least trying my best to be. We'll all be clipped across social media. So thank you again for your time, guys. Really appreciate it.
You.
Okay, thanks.
There we have it. Brilliant episode. I'm sure you'll agree. Really pleased with that, and I really enjoyed the conversation. It really put my mind at rest in many ways. They both really reassured me that the direction of travel for motivational interviewing is a positive one and worth following, and that they are open to the critiques that are often said. Unfortunately, that I've met people in that space that feel that any criticism or critique even of motivational interviewing and its angles is in bad faith and is dismissive and things like that. And so it was really nice for me to be able to articulate some of those questions, even obviously a lot of it being devil's advocacy, but just generally to see really open, honest discussions about some of the shortcomings and offering a distinction between what is and isn't in the scope of motivational interviewing and what its limitations are and things. It was just a really nice full whistle stop tour of it. Please do check out the bonus content that we make available across our social media, which was a back and forth where we did some role play between me and Rory, and I can confirm that I have been exercising more since. So if you want to see the powers of persuasion that motivational interviewing can do, even in that somewhat contrived environment, it was a really interesting thing, and certainly I noticed in myself that the key differences, it certainly wasn't me acting. I'm not a good enough actor for that, but do tune into that, and I hope you enjoy that too. And we'll bring you more Physio Matters next month. As you heard at the start of the show, do visit choosehealth.co.uk/support for our new subscription service and for bonus content, as well as free entries for free courses that we provide based on our speakers. Also, the Big R's conference, Reasoning, Responsibility and Reform, the Reforming MSK Practice Conference of 2019 is in October. Buy tickets @reforming MSK or reform.physio/conference for all the links and all the speakers and programs which will be out soon. So yeah, lots of ways you can get involved in various different things we're doing, as well as finding us across social media on the links at TPM Podcast on Instagram and Twitter, and of course finding the Physio Matters podcast across Facebook. But that's enough from me. We will go back to our brilliant guests who helped us with our cheesy sign out once again. So take care, and we'll see you next month.
You've been listening to the Physio Matters podcast,
discussing physio matters because physio
matters.
Brilliant. You did the jazz hands. Marvellous.